In the late 19th century, amid the violent conflicts between the Great Plains tribes and the U.S. government, an eccentric white woman appeared in the life of the Lakota Sioux spiritual leader, Sitting Bull. Caroline Weldon, a Swiss-born artist and activist, had left her comfortable life in the East to join the Indians in a desperate attempt to save them from an inevitable fate. She was not just a passing visitor, but became an unofficial advisor to Sitting Bull, writing angry letters to officials in Washington and trying to serve as a bridge between two worlds locked in a death struggle. Yet hers was not a traditional tale of heroism. Her presence among the Lakota stirred resentment, among white settlers who saw her as a traitor, and among tribal members who questioned her motives. She believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence, but reality was far harsher. The U.S. government was determined to break Native resistance, and Sitting Bull himself stood as the last obstacle to their forced assimilation. When Weldon arrived at the Standing Rock Reservation in 1889, she had left her husband, abandoned her former life, and become a fervent advocate for Native rights. But her passion was not enough. She failed to persuade Washington to honor its treaties, and she failed to shield Sitting Bull from the conspiracies closing in around him. In the end, she witnessed his killing at the hands of Indian police sent by the government to arrest him. Weldon was not a hero in everyone's eyes. Some historians have described her as an intruder, or even mentally unstable. Yet her story remains a testament to the chaos and despair that defined that era. She tried to do something at a time when so many were indifferent to Native suffering. Perhaps she was doomed from the start, but at least she tried. The relationship between Caroline Weldon and Sitting Bull remains one of the most intriguing and complex alliances in the history of Native American and white settler interactions during the late 19th century. Caroline Weldon, a Swiss-American artist and activist, arrived at Standing Rock Indian Reservation in the late 1880s, driven by a deep sympathy for the Lakota people and a fervent opposition to the U.S. government's policies toward Native Americans. Her connection with Sitting Bull, the revered Hunkpapa Lakota leader, was multifaceted, blending personal devotion, political advocacy, and cultural exchange. Weldon's journey to the reservation was not merely an act of charity, but a deliberate effort to align herself with the Lakota resistance against the encroachment of white settlers and the forced assimilation policies of the federal government. She became deeply involved in the movement to oppose the Dawes Act, which sought to dismantle tribal land ownership, and she served as a secretary and advisor to Sitting Bull, helping him communicate with government officials and the broader public. Her presence was both a boon and a point of contention. While some Lakota appreciated her efforts, others viewed her as an outsider whose involvement could provoke further retaliation from the U.S. authorities. Sitting Bull, a leader, known for his strategic mind and spiritual authority, initially regarded Weldon with cautious curiosity. Over time, their relationship grew into one of mutual respect, though the exact nature of their bond remains debated. Some accounts suggest that Weldon developed romantic feelings for Sitting Bull, while others emphasize their collaboration as purely political. Regardless, her influence on him was notable. She provided counsel on dealing with federal agents and even painted his portrait, leaving behind one of the most iconic images of the chief. However, Weldon's presence also attracted hostility. The U.S. government and military officials viewed her as a meddler, exacerbating tensions that ultimately culminated in the events leading up to the Wounded Knee Massacre. Her departure from the reservation in 1890, following increasing pressure and personal hardships, marked the end of her direct involvement with Sitting Bull. Tragically, he was killed just weeks later during an attempted arrest, a death that symbolized the crushing of Lakota resistance. Caroline Weldon's relationship with Sitting Bull was thus a fleeting yet significant chapter in the broader narrative of Native American struggles. Her advocacy, though flawed by her outsider status, reflected a rare solidarity in an era marked by violence and betrayal. Their alliance, however brief, underscored the intersections of personal conviction and political resistance in the face of overwhelming oppression. Caroline Weldon's journey into activism was deeply intertwined with the complexities of her upbringing, her intellectual pursuits, and the turbulent socio-political landscape of her time. Born Susanna Carolina Fayesh in 1844 in Basel, Switzerland, she was the daughter of a prominent family with ties to progressive intellectual circles. Her father, a respected physician, and her mother, a woman of refined education, instilled in her a curiosity about the world and a sense of moral responsibility. Switzerland, during her formative years, was a hub of radical thought, where debates about democracy, individual freedoms, and social justice flourished. This environment nurtured her early inclination toward challenging injustices, a trait that would define her later life. In her youth, Caroline was exposed to literature and philosophical works that questioned the established order. She read widely about the struggles of oppressed groups across history, from the peasant revolts in Europe to the abolitionist movements in America. These readings planted the seeds of her future activism, as she began to see herself as part of a broader struggle for human dignity. However, her life took a dramatic turn when she immigrated to the United States in the 1860s, following personal upheavals, including a failed marriage. The transition was not easy. She faced financial hardships and the loneliness of an immigrant woman in a rapidly industrializing nation. Yet these struggles only hardened her resolve to carve out a meaningful existence. America in the late 19th century was a land of contradictions, a nation celebrating its democratic ideals while systematically dispossessing Native Americans of their lands. Caroline, now using the name Weldon after a brief second marriage, found herself drawn to the plight of indigenous communities. Her European upbringing had taught her to question authority, and what she witnessed in the U.S. horrified her. The government's policies of forced assimilation, broken treaties, and violent suppression of Native resistance struck her as profound moral failures. Unlike many of her contemporaries who either ignored or justified these actions, she felt compelled to act. Her activism began modestly, with letters to newspapers and local officials condemning the mistreatment of Native Americans. But as she learned more about the Lakota Sioux and their resistance under Sitting Bull, her involvement deepened. She traveled to the Standing Rock Reservation, defying societal expectations of a white woman's role. There, she became not just an ally but a trusted confidant of Sitting Bull, serving as his secretary and interpreter. Her knowledge of English and her understanding of U.S. legal and political systems made her an invaluable advocate. She helped draft letters to federal agencies, articulated the Lakota's grievances in the press, and even challenged corrupt Indian agents. Caroline's writings during this period reveal a sharp intellect and a fiery passion for justice. In one scathing article she wrote, "The so-called Indian problem is not of their making but of ours, a problem born of greed and broken promises." Her words resonated with a small but growing audience of reformers, though they also made her enemies. Government officials, military officers, and even some settlers viewed her as a traitor to her race. She was vilified in the press, accused of being a squaw man's woman, and threatened with violence. Yet, she refused to be silenced. Her relationship with Sitting Bull was particularly controversial. While some historians suggest it was purely platonic, others speculate it may have been romantic. Regardless, their bond was undeniably strong, rooted in mutual respect and a shared commitment to resisting oppression. When the U.S. government sought to dismantle the Ghost Dance movement, a spiritual revival among Native Americans that authorities wrongly feared would incite rebellion, Caroline stood firmly with the Lakota. She warned Sitting Bull of the impending crackdown, but tragically, he was assassinated in 1890, a blow that devastated her. In the aftermath, Caroline's influence waned. The government intensified its suppression of Native resistance, and she found herself increasingly isolated. Former allies distanced themselves, fearing association with her would bring reprisals. She spent her final years in poverty, drifting between cities, her health deteriorating. Yet, even in obscurity, she never renounced her beliefs. In a letter to a friend, she wrote, "I would rather stand with the oppressed and be forgotten than side with the oppressors and be remembered." Caroline Weldon died in 1921, her name largely erased from mainstream history. But in recent decades, scholars and activists have rediscovered her legacy. She is now recognized as one of the few white women of her era to risk everything for Native American rights. Her story is a testament to the power of individual conscience in the face of systemic injustice. Her background, European education, immigrant struggles, and unwavering moral compass shaped her into a unique figure in the fight for justice. Unlike many reformers who worked from a distance, she immersed herself in the communities she sought to help, bridging cultural divides at great personal cost. Her life challenges the simplistic narratives of history, reminding us that courage often comes from the most unexpected places. The broader historical context of Caroline's activism cannot be overlooked. The late 19th century was a period of aggressive U.S. expansion, marked by the near-total destruction of native sovereignty. The Dawes Act of 1887, which sought to forcibly assimilate Native Americans by dividing their lands into individual plots, was in full effect during her time at Standing Rock. Caroline's opposition to such policies was not just ideological, but deeply personal. She saw firsthand the devastation they caused: families torn apart, traditions erased, and communities pushed to the brink of starvation. Her advocacy extended beyond political statements. She worked to provide the Lakota with practical assistance from medical aid to legal advice. At one point, she even attempted to establish a school that would teach Native children in their own language, a radical idea at a time when boarding schools sought to civilize them by eradicating their cultures. Though the project failed, due to lack of funding, it demonstrated her commitment to empowering rather than patronizing the people she fought for. Caroline's gender also played a significant role in how her activism was perceived. In a male-dominated society, her outspokenness was seen as unnatural, even dangerous. The press often focused on her personal life rather than her arguments, a tactic used to discredit women activists then and now. Yet she leveraged her identity as a woman to gain access to spaces where male activists might have been barred. Her correspondence with politicians and reformers often framed her appeals in the language of maternal care, a strategic choice that allowed her to navigate the gendered expectations of her time. The legacy of Caroline Weldon's activism is complex. She was neither a flawless hero nor a mere footnote in history. She was a woman of her time, shaped by its prejudices and possibilities, yet she transcended many of its limitations. Her efforts did not stop the displacement of the Lakota or prevent the Wounded Knee Massacre, but they provided a crucial counter-narrative to the dominant story of manifest destiny. In an era when Native voices were systematically silenced, she amplified them, however imperfectly. Today, as movements for Indigenous rights and racial justice continue, Caroline's story offers both inspiration and caution. It reminds us that allyship requires more than good intentions. It demands humility, perseverance, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Her life challenges us to ask, whose struggles do we stand with, and what are we willing to risk for justice? Her background, rooted in European Enlightenment ideals but transformed by American realities, made her activism possible. Without her education, she might not have had the tools to articulate her dissent. Without her immigrant experience, she might not have empathized so deeply with the displaced. And without her unyielding courage, she might have faded into the obscurity that society intended for women like her. Instead, she chose to stand on the right side of history, even when it cost her everything. The historical forces that shaped Caroline Weldon's activism, colonialism, racism, and patriarchy, are not relics of the past. They persist in new forms, making her story as relevant today as it was in the 19th century. In revisiting her life, we are forced to confront the enduring question of what it means to fight for justice in an unjust world. Her answer, etched in her actions, was clear: to stand with the marginalized, regardless of the consequences. In the late 19th century, the Great Plains of North America witnessed the rise of a spiritual and political movement known as the Ghost Dance, which spread among Native American tribes as a form of cultural and religious resistance against the oppression and forced displacement they faced at the hands of the U.S. government. Among the figures associated with this movement was a white woman named Caroline Weldon, who played a notable, albeit controversial, role in supporting Lakota leader Sitting Bull. Caroline Weldon, born Susanna Caroline Weldon in Switzerland in 1844, later immigrated to the United States, where she lived an unconventional life by the standards of women of that era. After a series of personal tragedies, including losing custody of her son, Weldon became drawn to the cause of Native Americans, particularly the Lakota, who were facing land seizures and forced relocation to reservations. In 1889, Weldon traveled to the Standing Rock Reservation in South Dakota, where she met the spiritual leader Sitting Bull, one of the prominent advocates of the Ghost Dance movement. This movement, embraced by many tribes, involved ritual dancing and prayer to restore lost lands and bring ancestors back to life, prophesying the disappearance of white settlers and the return of prosperity for Native peoples. The U.S. government and local authorities viewed the movement as a serious threat, leading to escalating tensions that culminated in the Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890. Caroline Weldon played a multifaceted role in these events. First, she acted as an advisor and interpreter for Sitting Bull, helping him communicate with American officials and the press. She also sought to defend Lakota rights by writing letters to government authorities and appealing to the public to highlight their grievances. Additionally, she attempted to serve as a bridge between the two cultures, though her intentions and approach raised suspicions among some tribal members as well as colonial authorities. However, her relationship with Sitting Bull was not without tension. Some reports suggest she tried to impose her views on him, while others believed she exploited her connection to him to enhance her own standing. As government repression intensified, her presence became a liability for the Lakota, and she was eventually expelled from the reservation shortly before the Wounded Knee Massacre. After the ghost dance movement faded, Weldon largely disappeared from historical records, living in isolation until her death in 1921. Though her role was minor compared to the movement's spiritual leaders, she remains a fascinating figure in the history of the conflict between Native Americans and the U.S. government, representing a rare case of a white woman who attempted to stand with indigenous peoples at a pivotal moment in their history. Caroline Weldon's involvement with the Sioux community remains a compelling yet under-examined episode in the broader narrative of Native American and Euro-American relations. Born Susanna Carolina Faisch in Switzerland in 1844, Weldon would later emerge as a passionate supporter of the Sioux during a pivotal era of their resistance against U.S. governmental expansion. Her actions, though divisive and met with varied responses, significantly influenced the Sioux, especially in the volatile period preceding the Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890. Weldon's path to the Sioux was not accidental, but driven by profound conviction. After enduring personal hardships, including the death of her son and a fractured marriage, she became increasingly committed to Native American advocacy. By the late 1880s, she had joined the National Indian Defense Association, a group opposing federal policies of forced assimilation and land seizures. Through this work, she encountered Sitting Bull, the esteemed Hunkpapa Lakota chief, and eventually journeyed to the Standing Rock Reservation to aid his cause. Upon her arrival, Weldon sought to mediate between the Sioux and federal agents, believing her identity as a white woman could lend legitimacy to their defiance. She helped Sitting Bull compose correspondence to officials, protesting further land loss and the oppressive Dawes Act, which aimed to dissolve tribal lands into individual plots. Her presence elicited both curiosity and distrust among the Sioux. Some saw her as a sincere supporter, while others doubted her intentions, mindful of the many betrayals by white allies in the past. Perhaps Weldon's most notable impact was her ability to broadcast Sioux grievances to a wider audience. At a time when popular media often depicted Native Americans as uncivilized, she labored to challenge this stereotype, penning articles and petitioning lawmakers to acknowledge the injustices inflicted upon the Sioux. Her advocacy, however, came at great personal expense. She was shunned by white society, branded as an outcast, and even denounced as a race traitor. Despite her commitment, Weldon's influence was constrained. The federal government's resolve to suppress the Sioux and eradicate their culture was unyielding. The ghost dance movement, which arose among Plains tribes in 1890 as a form of spiritual defiance, was brutally quashed. Weldon, who had developed a close bond with Sitting Bull, cautioned him about the risks of aligning with the movement, fearing it would provoke a violent response. Tragically, her warnings proved prescient when Sitting Bull was killed during an arrest attempt in December 1890, an event that precipitated the Wounded Knee Massacre. In the wake of these events, Weldon's role among the Sioux diminished. The community, reeling from trauma and confined to shrinking reservations, had little capacity for external allies. Yet her legacy persists as a nuanced figure who, despite her imperfections and the constraints of her era, resisted systemic oppression. For the Sioux, her endeavors were a brief but meaningful testament that not all outsiders were apathetic to their suffering. Caroline Weldon was an extraordinary woman of her time, choosing to leave behind a life of comfort in Euro-American society to live among the Sioux tribe in the late 19th century. Her journey was far from easy, as she faced immense challenges, from rejection by white society to the hardships she endured within a community, fighting for survival under U.S. government pressure. Initially, Caroline faced harsh criticism from Euro-American society, which saw her decision to join the Sioux as a betrayal of her race and culture. Women of that era rarely dared to defy traditions in such a manner, and her choice to live among savages, as they were called, made her a target of ridicule and scorn. Even her family and old friends severed ties with her, believing she had abandoned her civilization. Yet the external challenges paled in comparison to what she encountered in the Sioux camp. While some tribe members admired her courage and dedication, others questioned her motives. A white woman suddenly appearing among them to offer help was unusual, especially at a time when the U.S. government was intensifying efforts to seize Sioux lands and force them onto reservations. Was she a spy? Was she trying to exploit them? These questions lingered in many minds. Moreover, Caroline struggled with the daily hardships of camp life. She was unaccustomed to living in a teepee, enduring food shortages during harsh winters, or facing diseases that spread due to dire conditions. But she adapted quickly, becoming part of the community, even adopting a child from the tribe and becoming a close advisor to Chief Sitting Bull. However, her role as a mediator between the Sioux and the U.S. government brought further trouble. American officials accused her of interference, viewing her as an obstacle to their oppressive policies. Meanwhile, some tribe members grew suspicious of her influence on Sitting Bull, fearing she might lead him to make poor decisions. When the conflict between the Sioux and the government reached its peak, Caroline found herself in an impossible position. After the Wounded Knee massacre, where hundreds of Sioux men, women, and children were slaughtered, her hopes for peace crumbled. Instead of being remembered as a hero, she was driven out of the camp by some tribal members who believed she had brought them misfortune. Caroline returned to white society but no longer belonged. She spent the rest of her life in poverty and obscurity, dying alone without recognition of her role or sacrifices. Caroline Weldon's relationship with Sitting Bull, the revered Hunkpapa Lakota leader, was one of the most unusual and complex alliances in the history of Native American and white settler interactions. Born Susanna Carolina Faisch in Switzerland, Weldon reinvented herself in America as an activist deeply committed to the rights of Native Americans. Her journey from a well-intentioned but naive outsider to a trusted confidant of Sitting Bull unfolded against the backdrop of escalating tensions between the U.S. government and the Lakota people. Initially, Weldon's involvement with the Sioux stemmed from her affiliation with the National Indian Defense Association, NIDA, an organization that opposed the Dawes Act and sought to protect native lands from further encroachment. Believing that her advocacy could make a difference, she traveled to Standing Rock Reservation in 1889, determined to serve as an intermediary between the Lakota and federal authorities. Her arrival was met with skepticism, not only by Indian agents who viewed her as a meddlesome outsider, but also by many Lakota who distrusted white interlopers. Sitting Bull, however, was a man of discernment. Though initially cautious, he recognized Weldon's sincerity even if her understanding of Lakota struggles was imperfect. Unlike many white reformers who sought to impose their own solutions, Weldon took the time to listen. She learned the Lakota language, immersed herself in their customs, and gradually earned a measure of trust. Over time, she became one of the few non-native individuals whom Sitting Bull allowed into his inner circle. Their relationship deepened as Weldon assisted Sitting Bull in drafting letters to government officials, advocating against the further division of Sioux lands. She also helped him navigate the complexities of U.S. policies, serving as an interpreter of both language and intent. In return, Sitting Bull shared with her the spiritual and cultural wisdom of his people, offering her insights that few outsiders ever received. Weldon, in her own way, became a bridge between two worlds, one that was rapidly disappearing and another that sought to dominate it. Yet, their alliance was not without friction. Weldon's strong-willed nature sometimes clashed with Sitting Bull's leadership, and her presence stirred resentment among some Lakota who saw her influence as intrusive. Additionally, U.S. officials viewed her with increasing hostility, accusing her of inciting resistance among the Sioux. The tensions came to a head during the Ghost Dance movement, a spiritual revival that the government misinterpreted as a prelude to rebellion. Weldon, fearing for Sitting Bull's safety, urged caution, but her warnings went unheeded. The tragic end of their relationship came with Sitting Bull's assassination in December 1890, orchestrated by Indian agents who saw him as an obstacle to assimilation. Weldon, heartbroken and vilified by the press, left Standing Rock, her dreams of justice shattered. Though her time among the Lakota was brief, her bond with Sitting Bull remains a poignant testament to the rare moments of understanding between two cultures in a time of relentless conflict. Her story, often overlooked, reveals the complexities of cross-cultural alliances, marked by mutual respect, misunderstanding, and ultimately, tragedy. Caroline Weldon's relationship with Sitting Bull was not one of mere activism, but of genuine, if imperfect, friendship in the face of overwhelming adversity. The tensions between Caroline Weldon and James McLaughlin were deeply rooted in their conflicting visions for the future of the Lakota Sioux, particularly concerning the controversial figure of Sitting Bull. Weldon, a Swiss-American activist and artist, had aligned herself with the Lakota leader, advocating for indigenous rights and resisting the U.S. government's policies of assimilation and land dispossession. McLaughlin, as the Indian agent at the Standing Rock Agency, represented federal authority and was tasked with enforcing policies that Weldon vehemently opposed. Their clash was not merely personal, but symbolic of the broader struggle between indigenous sovereignty and governmental control during the late 19th century. One of the primary sources of conflict was Weldon's close association with Sitting Bull, whom she saw as a spiritual and political leader fighting for his people's survival. She served as his secretary, interpreter, and advisor, strengthening his resolve against the Dawes Act, which sought to dismantle tribal landholdings. McLaughlin viewed Weldon's influence as dangerous, fearing she was inciting resistance among the Lakota. He saw her as an outsider meddling in affairs she did not fully understand, disrupting his efforts to enforce federal mandates. Another key issue was the ghost dance movement, which swept through indigenous communities in 1890. Many Lakota believed the ritual would bring about the restoration of their lands and the disappearance of white settlers. Weldon, though not directly involved in the movement, sympathized with its spiritual significance. McLaughlin, however, perceived it as a direct threat to order and used it as justification for increasing military presence. His reports to Washington painted Sitting Bull as a rebellious leader who needed to be controlled, further straining his relationship with Weldon. Additionally, their personal differences exacerbated the conflict. Weldon was passionate and idealistic, driven by a sense of justice for the Lakota. McLaughlin, a seasoned bureaucrat, operated within the rigid framework of federal policy, prioritizing what he saw as civilizing the tribes. Their ideological divide made cooperation impossible, and as tensions escalated, McLaughlin worked to undermine Weldon's credibility, eventually forcing her departure from Standing Rock. The culmination of their conflict played a role in the tragic events leading to Sitting Bull's death in December 1890. McLaughlin's orders for Sitting Bull's arrest, motivated by fears of ghost dance-related unrest, resulted in a violent confrontation. Weldon, who had warned of the dangers of such heavy-handed tactics, blamed McLaughlin for the bloodshed. Their feud thus became intertwined with one of the darkest chapters in U.S. indigenous relations, reflecting the irreconcilable divide between assimilation and resistance. Caroline Weldon was a white woman who immersed herself in the life of the Lakota Sioux during a critical period in their history, the years leading up to the Wounded Knee Massacre. She came to the Standing Rock Reservation with personal and humanitarian motives, feeling deep sympathy for the suffering of Native Americans under the pressures of the U.S. government, which sought to strip them of their land and culture. Weldon had adopted the cause of Sitting Bull, the spiritual and political leader of the Lakota, becoming his advisor and translator, as well as assisting him in communications with American authorities. When the ghost dance movement spread among the Great Plains tribes in the late 19th century, Weldon found herself in a difficult position. The movement represented a spiritual hope for many Native tribes who had endured displacement and oppression, as they believed performing this dance would bring back their ancestors, restore the land's fertility, and remove white settlers. However, the U.S. government viewed the movement as a serious threat, leading to escalating tensions between the American military and Native tribes. In this context, Weldon's position grew more complicated. Although she sympathized with the Lakota's suffering, she was not a full supporter of the Ghost Dance movement, instead advocating for moderation and negotiation rather than confrontation. This stance caused her to lose the trust of some tribal members who saw the movement as their last refuge, while Sitting Bull still valued her assistance, but was preoccupied with the rapidly unfolding events. As government repression intensified, Weldon became increasingly isolated. She was never fully accepted by white society, which saw her as a traitor to their cause, and she no longer held the same influence among the Lakota, who turned toward more militant leaders. By the time of the Wounded Knee Massacre, Weldon had left the reservation, closing a significant chapter in her life. Caroline Weldon's departure from the Standing Rock Reservation marked a pivotal moment in the conflict between the Lakota people and the U.S. government, leaving a political and spiritual void that was not easily filled. Weldon was more than just an advisor to Lakota leader Sitting Bull. She served as a bridge between the white and native worlds, translating the aspirations and threatened rights of the indigenous people. With her departure, the Lakota lost a powerful voice in the media and American public opinion, which oscillated between sympathy for their plight and the condescending narrative promoted by authorities. Weldon had devoted her later years to defending the Lakota's sacred lands, helping draft petitions and speeches denouncing government violations. However, her late arrival at the reservation, after years of repression and forced displacement, made her mission nearly impossible, especially as military pressures intensified and hostilities between settlers and tribes grew. Her internal disputes with Sitting Bull and those opposed to cooperation with Americans left a bitter legacy. Some viewed her as an outsider serving external agendas, while others saw her as an irreplaceable loss, given her understanding of federal law and her ability to leverage it for the Lakota cause. Without her, the Lakota lost one of the few connections they had to a white ally who defied racial stereotypes. Weldon was not without flaws. Her presence had caused divisions, but she stood as a rare symbol of solidarity in an era when Native Americans faced genocide in all its forms. On a personal level, her departure was not entirely voluntary. The physical and emotional exhaustion she endured during her years at the reservation left her drained, and the smear campaigns against her by government-aligned newspapers tarnished her reputation even among some Lakota. After she left, crises escalated. The government tightened its siege on the reservation, cutting off food supplies during a harsh winter, while Sitting Bull continued his resistance, which ultimately led to his killing by Indian police. Weldon's exit signaled the end of a period of relative peaceful resistance, and the beginning of increased violence that shattered the Lakota's dream of retaining their lands without surrender. Caroline Weldon, a Swiss-American artist and activist, became deeply involved in the struggles of the Sioux Nation during the late 19th century. Her journey into activism was not solely through words or political advocacy, but was profoundly intertwined with her artistic expression. Weldon's paintings and sketches served as both a documentation of Sioux life and a medium through which she communicated their plight to the broader American public. Her art was not merely decorative, it was a form of resistance, a bridge between cultures, and a tool for preserving the dignity of a people facing displacement and cultural erasure. Weldon arrived at Standing Rock during a tumultuous period, as the U.S. government sought to dismantle Native sovereignty through land seizures and forced assimilation. Unlike many outsiders who viewed Native Americans through a lens of exoticism or condescension, Weldon approached the Sioux with respect, seeking to understand their traditions and struggles. Her artistic work reflected this genuine engagement. She painted portraits of Sioux leaders, including Sitting Bull, capturing not just their physical likeness but their strength and resilience. These portraits humanized the Sioux in an era when mainstream media often depicted them as savages or obstacles to progress. Her paintings were more than static images. They were narratives. Through careful attention to detail, Weldon incorporated elements of Sioux culture, traditional clothing, ceremonial objects, and the stark beauty of the Northern Plains into her work. These depictions countered the dominant narratives of the time, which either romanticized Native Americans as vanishing relics or vilified them as enemies. Instead, Weldon's art presented the Sioux as a living, sovereign people with rich traditions and inherent rights. Beyond portraiture, Weldon used her art to document the injustices faced by the Sioux. She sketched scenes of government agents, imposing policies, the hardships of reservation life, and the encroachment of settlers. These works, though less celebrated than her portraits, were crucial in exposing the realities of federal Indian policy. While she did not have the means to widely reproduce her sketches, she shared them with reformers and journalists, contributing to a growing critique of U.S. treatment of Native nations. Weldon's activism was not without controversy. Her close association with Sitting Bull and her vocal opposition to the Dawes Act made her a target of government suspicion and media ridicule. Yet, her art provided a shield of legitimacy. How could a mere hysterical woman, as her detractors claimed, produce such thoughtful and evocative work? Her paintings forced skeptics to confront the humanity of the Sioux in a way that speeches or pamphlets alone could not. In many ways, Weldon's art was her activism. It allowed her to forge personal connections with the Sioux, who respected her willingness to listen and depict their world with integrity. For the non-native audience, her work was an invitation to see beyond stereotypes and question the morality of federal policies. Though her efforts did not halt the seizure of Sioux lands or prevent the Wounded Knee massacre, her legacy endures in the intersection of art and advocacy. Caroline Weldon demonstrated that brushstrokes could be as powerful as protests, and that sometimes the most enduring acts of resistance are those that preserve truth in pigment and line. In the late 19th century, North America was undergoing radical shifts in its relationship with indigenous peoples, as successive wars and treaties reshaped the fate of native tribes. Amid this struggle, Sitting Bull, the spiritual and political leader of the Lakota, emerged as a symbol of resistance and dignity. Yet his image among white Americans was contradictory, oscillating between the savage warrior and the oppressed hero. Here entered Caroline Weldon, a white woman who dedicated part of her life to defending Lakota rights and painted numerous portraits of Sitting Bull, contributing to a more complex and humanized perception of him. Caroline Weldon arrived at the Standing Rock Reservation in 1889 after years of advocacy for Native rights. Believing that art could challenge stereotypes, she began painting Sitting Bull with intricate details that portrayed him not as a fierce warrior, but as a wise man, his features radiating dignity and depth. These paintings, which captured rare moments of the leader in quiet reflection, defied the mainstream media's portrayal of tribal savagery. Weldon was not merely an artist, but also a political activist, writing articles describing the injustices faced by the Lakota and using her paintings as evidence of their humanity. Though some white newspapers mocked her as the crazy white woman, her artwork gradually reached a broader audience, particularly in the American East, where intellectuals and activists began reconsidering government policies toward Native Americans. Yet, the impact of these paintings was not one-dimensional. While some saw them as an opportunity for deeper cultural understanding, others exploited them to promote an image of peaceful Indians who could be assimilated into American society, ignoring their demands for sovereignty and land. Even Sitting Bull himself had mixed feelings about the portraits. While he appreciated Weldon's efforts, he recognized that some could be used to soften the narrative of his people's resistance. After Sitting Bull's death in 1890, Weldon's paintings became valuable historical artifacts, preserving his legacy not only as a symbol of armed resistance, but also of wisdom and spiritual leadership. Over time, her works became references for historians and artists seeking to retell history from indigenous perspectives. Today, Weldon's paintings are displayed in museums as testimonies to a turbulent era, where one individual, through art and activism, attempted to reshape the dominant narrative. Despite criticism, her contribution to humanizing Sitting Bull remains an unforgettable chapter in the history of cross-cultural relations in America. In the late 19th century, the relationship between Native American tribes and European settlers was marked by tension and conflict. Amid these events, Caroline Weldon emerged as a unique figure, a white woman who chose to live among the Lakota people and became close to their spiritual leader, Sitting Bull. Weldon was not merely a visitor, but grew into a trusted advisor, advocating for the rights of his people. Yet one of her most enduring legacies remains the portraits she painted of Sitting Bull, which hold profound historical, cultural, and artistic significance. Weldon was a talented artist who met Sitting Bull during a critical period in his life. as he resisted the U.S. government's efforts to seize native lands and force his people onto reservations. During her time among the Lakota, she painted several portraits of Sitting Bull, capturing his dignified and wise demeanor as a leader. These works were not just artistic endeavors. They became rare visual documents offering an intimate glimpse of a historical figure often misrepresented by mainstream media. Before Weldon's paintings, most depictions of Sitting Bull were either quick newspaper sketches or formal photographs, lacking psychological depth. Her portraits, however, revealed his humanity, sometimes reflecting sorrow, other times defiance. These subtle details made her paintings a vital resource for understanding his true character, far removed from the stereotypes perpetuated by settlers. Beyond their artistic value, the portraits carried political weight. At a time when the U.S. government sought to vilify native leaders as savages, Weldon's paintings provided visual proof of Sitting Bull's nobility and cultural richness. Later, these images helped shift some Americans' perceptions, portraying native leaders as dignified figures with a rich heritage rather than mere obstacles to civilization. Historically, these paintings are rare records of a period marked by systemic oppression. Before Sitting Bull's tragic death in 1890, Weldon had left the reservation due to internal conflicts, but her works endured as testaments to an unlikely friendship between a white woman and a resistant tribal leader. Today, these portraits are displayed in museums and studied in history and anthropology, not just as art but as symbols of human solidarity against injustice. In conclusion, Caroline Weldon's portraits of Sitting Bull are more than images. They are testimonies to a turbulent era, a rare human connection, and an effort to preserve the dignity of an oppressed people. Through her art, Weldon immortalized the spirit of a great leader, leaving a visual legacy that helps future generations understand history in all its complexity. In the late 19th century, the vast plains of North America were the stage for radical transformations, as the Sioux tribes found themselves confronting the expansion of Euro-American civilization, which threatened their traditional way of life. Amid these turbulent circumstances, an unexpected figure emerged, a white woman from the civilized world who decided to leave her former life behind and immerse herself in the world of the Sioux. That woman was Caroline Weldon, an artist and activist who found in art a bridge to connect with the Lakota Sioux people, particularly with the great spiritual leader Sitting Bull. Weldon was not merely a passing artist. She possessed a unique talent for capturing intricate details and expressing human emotions through her paintings. When she arrived at the Standing Rock Reservation, she carried more than just her art supplies. She brought a genuine curiosity to understand a culture on the brink of disappearance. Through her art, she was able to open doors for dialogue with members of the community who were initially skeptical of her intentions. For Weldon, art was a universal language, a means of expressing respect and appreciation for Sioux culture. Instead of arriving as a missionary or teacher imposing her views, she came as a student ready to learn. By painting the faces of tribal members, especially Sitting Bull, she showed them that she saw them as individuals with dignity and worth, not merely as subjects for anthropological study. This different approach gradually made them open their hearts to her. Her paintings reflected an unusual depth for the time. They were not superficial portraits, but attempts to capture the spirit behind the features. When the Sioux saw themselves through her eyes, they felt valued, a rare sentiment in an era when they were subjected to media distortion and persecution. Yet the impact of Weldon's art was not limited to the personal level. She used her paintings as a way to document Sioux life during a critical period in their history. At a time when the U.S. government was trying to force them to abandon their identity, her works became visual testimony to a rich culture worth preserving. This helped raise external awareness of their plight, particularly among Northeastern elites who were beginning to reassess government policies toward Native Americans. Moreover, her relationship with Sitting Bull was not merely that of an artist and her subject. It evolved into a close friendship and political collaboration. She became his advisor, assisting him in communicating with American authorities, using her skills in writing and art to convey his message to the outside world. Here, art emerged as a diplomatic tool, enabling her to build bridges between two clashing worlds. Over time, Weldon became part of the Sioux community, not as an outsider, but as an ally and friend. They accepted her because they saw in her art a rare sincerity, an expression of a genuine desire to understand and participate. In the end, her art was not just a means of artistic expression, but a tool for human connection, helping to break down cultural barriers during one of the most tumultuous periods in Sioux history.